From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Donald Trump promised a crackdown on illegal migration, and he's already following through. In his first few days, he's promising to send 10,000 military troops to the border, unleash ICE agents to locate criminal illegal migrants across the U.S., and promise to punish so-called sanctuary cities that resist his efforts. How will all of this play out politically in the days ahead? Plus, President Trump is now a crypto billionaire after he floated a crypto token, $Trump, before his inauguration, and it has soared in value since, even as his administration will have to regulate crypto assets. Is he courting trouble down the road? Welcome to Potomac Watch, the daily podcast of the Wall Street Journal opinion pages. I'm Paul Gigot, the editor, and I'm here with my colleagues, Monet Ukwe-Barua and Alicia Finley. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the border wars. So, Monet, big picture, what do you think of the president's early moves on the border?
Well, I think that he knows that issue was among the biggest that sent him back to the White House. There's been a massive swing of public opinion in terms of people not only in border states, but in cities across the country feeling that way too many people were able to enter illegally under President Biden. And so he wants to make a show of force coming out early. So some of the things that he's done are saying that there are going to be more agencies, not just Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, which is usually in charge of finding and deporting illegal migrants. Now he's saying that the Justice Department enforcement agencies like the ATF and the DEA, which focus on weapons and drugs, are also going to have the ability to enforce immigration law. And so part of this is saying this is going to be extremely expensive for the country to do, and we want to make sure we're using the resources that the federal government already has to prioritize immigration.
Does that make sense to you, or do you think that it's going to actually take resources away from other priorities?
It does within reason. I think that the DEA and ATF, for example, are going to have to make sure that they're continuing to prioritize their main responsibilities, going after drugs, going after illegal weapons and things like that. But I do think that there will be instances where there's a lot of overlap between their responsibilities and when they will have the ability to say, we're going to focus on finding some of these illegal migrants who are involved in some of the criminal areas that they investigate and make sure that they're coordinating better with ICE in terms of getting those folks out of the country. Trump is trying to look for what are the easy things that I can do to make sure that this effort is going to be able to succeed quickly and in the least expensive manner possible.
Alicia, now let's break down a couple of these things, but start with this decision to send more troops to the border. I guess some are already there under Biden, but Trump is saying that he's going to, or it's leaking that he's going to send as many as 10,000 and that they're going to do a variety of tasks down there, including building the wall. I mean, a couple of questions. One is this legal? I think some of our listeners may wonder, is it legal to use the military for this kind of border security purpose? And can the military really arrest migrants or not?
Well, no, the military cannot arrest migrants, and that is probably one of the biggest limitations on their authority. Trump is mainly sending them down to help with support tasks to essentially free up Customs and Border Patrol officials to do those kinds of jobs, arresting migrants. So that's one of the goals. I'd say that the second goal is to deter people from even coming to the border and trying to get in. That's, the immigration or migration numbers have fallen by about 80 or 90% since Biden issued his executive order restricting migration and entry once numbers climb above, I believe it's 5,000. And as I said, the numbers have already fallen, but are still higher than they were during most of the Trump administration. So I think they're trying to send a message, don't come. We have the military down there ready to get you. And I'd say that that's probably the message that they're trying to convey with some of their other actions and executive orders.
The president declared a border emergency, Alicia, which means that he gets to use more authorities. Is there any particular authority that gets freed up from that declaration?
Well, you mentioned one of them, which is that he intends to repurpose money from other activities, or for instance, the defense, to build his wall. He attempted this in his first administration toward the end, and it got wrapped up in legal challenges. And I'd expect that this to be the same. But Republicans may also be able to use budget reconciliation to appropriate more money for building his wall and other border security purposes. I think it sets a horrible precedent, honestly, to use that as national emergency as a pretext to shift money from the defense budget for his border wall. And I think we've argued in the past that it could encourage other presidential or executive abuses by Democrats, and no doubt it did with Biden. But I think that that's one of the major authorities that is opened up by the national emergency declaration.
Yeah, I think the overuse of the emergency designation to enhance executive authority is now seems to be firmly embedded in our politics and not for the best. If I were a member of Congress, I would try to think of narrowing it to real, genuine emergencies. President Trump has now declared it in the border and also on energy. And I don't certainly see that. I mean, we have record energy production in this country. I'm not sure there's a crisis. You can argue there's misguided policy, but not an emergency. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the law of sanctuary cities and just whether or not the administration can actually arrest officials who resist ICE and the Trump administration when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here with Mene Ukoya-Barua and Alicia Finley on Potomac Watch. Let's talk about another element of this immigration migrant enforcement agenda, Mene, and that is the whole issue of sanctuary cities. And I want to listen to a comment by Donald Trump with Sean Hannity and then Tom Homan, his border czar, on CNN.
We're trying to end them, and a lot of the people in those communities don't want them. You know, California is a big example.
Would you cut off their money?
I might have to do that. Sometimes that's the only thing you can do. Look, California is a great example of it. If you actually poll the people, they don't want sanctuary cities, but Gavin Newsom does, and these radical left politicians do.
In places like sanctuary cities where we can't arrest a bad person in the jail, we would like to have access to the jail to arrest a criminal alien in the safety and security of a county jail, which is safer for the community, safer for the officers, safer for the alien. But when you release a public safety threat out of a sanctuary jail and won't give us access to them, that means we got to go to the neighborhood and find him. And we will find him. But when we find him, he may be with others. Others that don't have a criminal conviction but are in the country illegally, they will be arrested too. Because we're not going to strike, and this is the difference between the last administration and this administration. ICE is going to enforce the immigration law. There's nothing in the INA, the Immigration Nationality Act, says you got to be convicted of a serious crime in order to be removed from this country. So there's going to be more collateral arrests in sanctuary cities because they forced us to go in the community and find the guy we're looking for.
Mene, interesting point there. Because of resistance to the ICE enforcement agenda under Trump in some cities and states, it could have actually a boomerang effect and cause more people to be rounded up, because if ICE discovers them with others who are not convicted of crimes but are nonetheless illegal, they'll get wrapped up too.
Yeah, I mean, I think you heard a couple of things in those clips. The first was Trump talking about the politics of sanctuary cities, saying that even in a place like California, the ordinary voters don't want them. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that, especially in the direction. You have seen a lot of these blue cities, public opinion has shifted towards immigration enforcement, especially as migrants have arrived in these cities in overwhelming numbers, are on the streets, and they don't have the ability to pay for or care for them. So I do think that a lot of people do want a certain amount of deportation and certainly a decrease in the number of migrants arriving in a disorderly way. With regard to ICE and how they're able to enforce the law, I think Tom Homan, the border czar, was laying out a scenario in which they would be able to actually go and encounter these sanctuary cities and say, you aren't complying with the law. And that would be the case in a situation where ICE actually has the specific names and identities of people who they believe entered the country illegally. And they might be in prison. They might have previously been in prison and released into the street in a city like LA. And if Los Angeles declines to cooperate with ICE and say, we're going to help you to bring this person into custody, they are violating the law, as recent court precedents have actually demonstrated. So sanctuary cities have some rights in terms of not having to actively cooperate with the federal government, go out of their way to make sure that illegal aliens are deported. but they can't obstruct an actual investigation that ICE is conducting. And when they do, it seems like the Trump administration is going to try to hold their feet to the fire.
Okay, so let's just get into the definition of obstruction. If Tom Homan has a list and says in Chicago jail, you have Mr. X who is illegal, and they say, sorry, we're not going to turn him over. Is that obstruction?
Yes, it is. If they can prove that Chicago knows that this person is in their custody or previously has been in their custody and is still within the city limits, and they deny knowledge of that or in any way prevent ICE agents from being able to operate and bring that person into custody, that would be obstruction.
And Alicia, would that mean that the federal government could prosecute these obstructing officials, whether they be local law enforcement or even local politicians?
They could, under the federal law, they could. I'm not sure that if that would be the wisest use of resources. And I think that would actually embolden some of these Democratic city mayors like Brandon Johnson in Chicago, who essentially are trying to use this, their sanctuary city status, as a political point to say, I'm resisting Donald Trump, and they're trying to score political points. And so I think actually trying to resist or arrest them, I think would play right into their hands.
Before we leave this issue and get to Donald Trump, crypto billionaire, I want to ask about the impact of this roundup on the economy, because I think there's a lot of evidence, Alicia, that the flow of migrants, whatever you think about the illegality of it and the disarray and all of that, that the influx of all of these workers in the Biden administration did help the economy and the job market, because they were filling all kinds of roles in a labor market that had fewer workers than we need. And what happens if you take 1, 2, 3, 4 million of those folks out of the job market?
I think that's right. And it depends on how Trump goes about this. If they're only arresting or trying to deport the ones that are criminals who are stealing and doing that kind of stuff, there's not going to be any effect. And those people are actually, harming businesses. Now, as you mentioned, all the growth in the labor force over the last 2 years have actually been foreign workers. And that has actually contributed to a faster economic growth, which is a function in part of the size of the labor market and the growth in the labor market. The question is whether if you have a slowdown in actually new migration, and again, yes, a lot of these people who are coming in are claiming asylum and aren't technically here completely legally, but they are filling needed jobs, especially in home healthcare places, hospitality, then you may actually see a slowdown as a result. Now, there's another issue is that some of the migrants are actually coming to cities, places like Chicago, LA, New York City, where you've had increasing unemployment, in part because of their own policies that are harmful to business. And so a lot of those who go to those cities aren't working and are actually just being essentially supported by taxpayers, which I think is why you really need a better visa program for guest workers so you can match these people who are coming in with the available jobs.
Yeah, the point of which I'm trying to make here is not that we support this illegal immigration because it helps the economy. It's that the simple fact, that, as Alicia describes it, a growing labor force helps a growing economy when those people are gainfully employed. And, if you're going to take out the illegal workers, you're going to need more legal pathways to come into the United States. And I'm thinking of construction. You and I both hang out around New York City, and any construction site you go to is full of people who are speaking not English. Mm-hmm. And I don't know who's going to build all those homes in LA that burned down.
Yeah. I mean, I think that listeners will remember 2021 in the labor market at that time. This period was referred to as the Great Resignation. You had a lot of American workers who were in low-skilled jobs moving into higher paid ones, and there was a massive shortage. We had record level of job openings for more than a year, more than 10 million job openings, twice the number of unemployed people. And part of the reason why the labor market rationalized after that point was because of all of these immigrant workers who were coming in and taking some of those lower paid jobs that Americans had largely moved out of. And so the Trump administration is going to have to bear this in mind, of course, in terms of how they're focusing their deportation program. But there are mixed signals already. I think that Stephen Miller has already come out just in the first couple days of the administration and touted the fact that there were some migrants who were rounded up in the first stage of deportations who weren't accused or convicted criminals. Someone in New York State who he went out of his way to point out there wasn't any crime attached to him other than crossing the border illegally. Is that going to be a major focus of the Trump deportation project? Perhaps not. Maybe they're just looking for a few token individuals to show that nobody is safe and encourage people to self-deport. But if they do continue to go after people who are working and are law-abiding in this country, then that is going to have an impact on the labor market that is going to potentially depress economic growth.